Number 1.
John Reginald Halliday Christie, April 8, 1899 – July 15, 1953, was an English serial killer active in the 1940s and 1950s. He was arrested, tried and hanged for murder in 1953. Prior to his arrest, he was involved in another previous murder trial. As a principal witness for the Crown, his fellow tenant Timothy Evans was accused of the murders of his own wife and child, and subsequently convicted of, and executed for, the murder of the baby. Many critics have speculated that Christie committed the murders and framed Evans for them. Others have suggested that there could have been two separate murderers living in the same shared house at the same time. Mr. Justice Brabham stated in 1966 that it was more probable than not that Evans killed his wife, and that he did not kill his daughter Geraldine. While neither Christie's nor Evans' innocence or guilt concerning these particular crimes have ever been conclusively proven, the case sparked massive public outrage and contributed to the suspension of the death penalty in Britain in 1965. Christie was raised in Halifax, then in the West Riding of Yorkshire. He was abused by his father and dominated by his mother and sisters. At the age of 8, Christie was witness to the open coffin of his grandfather. Christie won a scholarship to Halifax Secondary School when he was 11. He excelled particularly at mathematics and algebra, and was skilled at detailed work. It was later found he had an IQ of 128. He sang in the choir and became a scout, but he was unpopular with his fellow pupils. Upon leaving school in 1913, Christie became an assistant movie projectionist. By the time he reached puberty, he already associated sex with death, dominance, and violent aggression, rendering him impotent unless in complete control. His first attempts at sex were failures, branding him as Reggie No Dick and Can't Do It Christie throughout adolescence. He was also a hypochondriac and hysteric, and often exaggerated or feigned illness as a ploy to get attention. Christie enlisted as a signalman in World War I, during which he was hospitalized after a mustard gas attack, claiming to have been blinded. No record of his supposed blindness exists, however. In 10 Rillington Place, author Ludovic Kennedy wrote that Christie exaggerated his blindness, as well as the 3-year period afterward in which he was mute. Christie married 22-year-old Ethel Waddington from Sheffield on May 10, 1920. It was a dysfunctional union, as Christie was impotent with her and frequented prostitutes. Friends and neighbors gossiped that she stayed with him out of fear. They separated after 4 years, when Christie moved to London, and Ethel lived with relatives. Over the next decade, Christie was convicted for many petty criminal offenses. These included 3 months imprisonment for stealing postal orders while working as a postman on April 12, 1921, 9 months in Uxbridge Jail in September 1924 for theft, 6 months hard labor for assaulting a prostitute, with whom he was living in Battersea, in May 1929, and 3 months imprisonment in 1933 for stealing a car from a priest who had befriended him. Christie and his wife reconciled after his release in November 1933. He did not reform, however. He continued to seek out prostitutes to relieve his increasingly violent sexual urges, which included necrophilia. In December 1938, Christie and his wife moved into the ground-floor apartment of 10 Rillington Place, in the Ladbroke Grove neighborhood of Notting Hill. On the outbreak of World War II, he applied to join the police force and was accepted, and was assigned to Harrow Road Police Station. Christie began an affair with a woman working at the police station whose husband was a serving soldier. The relationship lasted until December 1943, when he resigned. The husband caught them in bed and beat Christie up. The first person Christie admitted to killing was Ruth Fewhurst, whom he impulsively strangled during sex in August 1943. In October 1944, he murdered a work colleague, Muriel Amelia Eady, by promising to cure her bronchitis with a special mixture he had concocted, using domestic gas which contained carbon monoxide, that would render a person unconscious. Once Eady was knocked out, Christie choked her to death and raped her post-mortem. Christie buried both Fewhurst and Eady in the building's communal garden. Timothy Evans and his pregnant wife, Beryl, moved into the top-floor flat of 10 Rillington Place in April 1948. On October 10, Beryl gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Geraldine. In November 1949, Beryl Evans found out she was pregnant again and feared they could not afford another child. Evans later told police that Christie promised the couple he could abort the baby. Kennedy writes that, on November 8, Christie used his special gas to incapacitate Beryl, whom he strangled and raped post-mortem. When Evans returned from work that night, Christie told him that Beryl had died during the procedure and that they had to hide the body. Abortion was illegal in England at the time. Christie then convinced Evans to stay with a relative in Wales and leave Geraldine in his care. Evans later said he returned to the apartment several times to ask about Geraldine, but Christie had refused to let him see her. On November 30, 1949, Evans went to the police in Merthyr Tydfil and said he had accidentally killed Beryl by giving her something contained in a bottle that a man had given him to help abort her unborn baby, and then disposing of her body in a sewer drain. He told the police that, after arranging for Geraldine to be looked after, he had gone to Wales. When police examined the drain outside the front of the building, however, they found nothing, and, furthermore, discovered that the manhole cover required the combined strength of all three officers in order to remove it. When re-questioned, Evans said that Christie had offered to provide an abortion for Beryl. Evans had returned home from work on November 8 to find Beryl dead. He said Christie then disposed of the body and made arrangements for some people to look after Geraldine, while Evans lay low. During a search of 10 Rillington Place on December 2, 1949, the police found the bodies of Beryl and Geraldine Evans hidden in the wash house in the back garden. Both had been strangled. When Evans was shown the clothing taken from the bodies of his wife and child, he was also asked whether he was responsible for their deaths. This was, according to Evans' statement, the first occasion in which he was informed that his baby daughter had been killed. Evans, according to Kennedy, said yes. He then confessed to having strangled Beryl during an argument over debts and strangling Geraldine 2 days later, after which he left for Wales. This confession, along with other contradictory statements Evans made during the police interrogation, is often cited as proof of his guilt, although Kennedy says his interrogation was worded by investigating officers and carried out over the course of late evening and early morning hours to the physical and emotional detriment of the accused. Evans later recanted this testimony, and the case went to trial, which began on January 11, 1950. Christie was a key witness for the prosecution and was instrumental in Evans being found guilty 2 days later. The jury took only 40 minutes to come to this decision. After a failed appeal on February 20, Evans was hanged on March 9, 1950. Christie was fired from his job from the Post Office Savings Bank, which he had held for the previous 4 years, due to the disclosure of his previous criminal offenses at Evans' trial. He sank into deep depression and lost 28 pounds. He remained unemployed until August 1950, when he found a clerical position with British Road Transport Services. He stayed there until December 6, 1952. When he suddenly resigned. Christie claimed to his boss and to his neighbors that he had found a job with better prospects in Sheffield, and that he would be leaving London to move there with his wife early in the new year. When his wife disappeared, he claimed she had already moved, and that he would be following on soon. In fact, Christie murdered his wife in bed on the morning of December 14, 1952. She was last seen alive 2 days earlier. The day after he murdered his wife, he altered the date of a letter she had written on the 10th to the 15th, explaining that Ethel had no envelopes, so he sent the letter from work. On December 16, he took his wife's wedding ring to a jewelry shop and sold it. A week after that, he sold her watch and wedding band. He kept writing letters to her sister in Sheffield up to early January, claiming that rheumatism had prevented her from writing. On January 8, 1953, Christie sold most of his furniture. He kept 3 chairs, a kitchen table and a mattress to sleep on. On February 2, he forged his wife's signature on her bank account and emptied it. After early February, Christie no longer bothered to answer the letters from relatives inquiring after his wife. Between January 19 and March 6, 1953, Christie murdered 3 more women he invited back to 10 Rillington Place. Kathleen Maloney from Southampton, Rita Nelson, and Hectorina McLennan. Christie claimed that McLennan had wandered off and kept up the pretense for 2 weeks, asking her boyfriend, Alex Baker, how she was. Baker presumed she had gone back to her native Scotland. Christie moved out of 10 Rillington Place on March 20, 1953. He defrauded a couple who took up residence by taking £7 from them, although he was not authorized by the landlord of the property to do so. They were forced to move out within 24 hours. The day he left Rillington Place, Christie booked a room at the King's Cross Rotten houses under his real name and address. He asked for 7 nights, but only stayed for 4, leaving on March 24, 1953. A few days later, a new tenant discovered the bodies hidden in a wallpapered-over coal cellar in the kitchen. Pathological tests later revealed carbon monoxide in their bodies. He called the police, and a nationwide manhunt ensued on March 25. 3 days later, Christie telephoned the News of the World and arranged to meet a reporter, offering an exclusive interview. He said he would allow himself to be handed over to the police in exchange. The meeting never took place because Christie was frightened by the arrival of 2 policemen, as he waited to meet the reporter. After he left Rotten House, Christie wandered all over London, sleeping on park benches at night. The search for him ended on the morning of March 31, when he was arrested near the embankment at Putney Bridge, after being challenged about his identity by a policeman. When asked what his name and address were, he said John Waddington, 35 Westbourne Grove. He was then asked to remove his hat. The policeman recognized him and asked, "You are Christie, aren't you?" Christie confirmed that he was. When arrested, he had with him his identity card, a ration book, his union card, an ambulance badge, and an old newspaper clipping about the remand of Timothy Evans. The next day he was charged with his wife's murder. On April 15, he was charged with murdering the 3 prostitutes. While in prison, Christie confessed to murdering all the women found in the cellar, as well as Beryl Evans. He never admitted to killing Geraldine Evans. He was interviewed after the trial by John Scott Henderson QC, the recorder of Portsmouth, who had been placed in charge of an inquiry into the case by David Maxwell Fyfe, the serving Home Secretary. Christie's trial began on June 22, 1953. In the same court where Evans had been tried. He was on trial solely for the murder of his wife. Christie pleaded insanity and claimed to have a poor memory of the events. The jury rejected the plea and, after 22 minutes, found him guilty of murdering his wife. On June 29, Christie said he would not appeal against the death sentence. Fyfe said on July 13 that he would not grant a reprieve, because there were no physical or psychological grounds for doing so. Some MPs tried to postpone the execution, so that Christie could talk more about the earlier murders, but Maxwell Fyfe refused to grant this. Christie himself refused in the final days of his life to meet MPs in his cell. He was hanged by Albert Pierrepoint at Pentonville Prison, on the same gallows as Timothy Evans. While Christie neither confessed to nor was convicted of killing Geraldine Evans, public opinion widely considered him guilty, casting doubt onto the fairness of Evans' trial and execution. To date, there exists no definitive evidence to prove or disprove Evans' innocence, or Christie's guilt in Geraldine's murder, although the Brabant inquiry conducted during 1965 to 1966 concluded that Evans had probably killed his wife, but not his daughter. Timothy Evans was granted a posthumous pardon in 1966. In 1970, the movie 10 Rillington Place was released, based largely on Kennedy's book, starring Richard Attenborough as Christie and John Hurt as Evans. Parts of the film were shot in Rillington Place itself, renamed Ruston Close after Christie's execution, using a similar neighboring gaslit property. Shortly before the entire street was cleared for redevelopment. The street, now completely redeveloped, has a garden area in the space where the building of number 10 should be, 10 Ruston Close being a ground floor flat to the right of that garden.
Number 2.
Are serial killers smart? One would think so, based on how they are depicted in books, movies and television shows, often as diabolical geniuses. Hannibal Lecter, in the Silence of the Lambs film and subsequent sequels, was a brilliant, cultured and accomplished former psychiatrist and surgeon, who had refined taste in art and cuisine which he spoke eloquently about. That's often not the reality. Some serial killers certainly were above average in intelligence. Edmund Kemper, who murdered 10 people, including his own grandparents and mother, reportedly had an IQ of 145. But he was the exception and not the rule. The average IQ of serial killers is 94.5, and the median is 86, based on 4,743 serial killers, according to the Serial Killer Information Center, a database created by 2 universities, with the aim of collecting and regularly updating serial killer data. They last updated their site in 2016. Average intelligence is considered to be between 90 to 110 IQ. So, this study suggests that serial killers as a whole are actually on the lower side of average. Jack Rosewood, author of the Big Book of Serial Killers, 150 Serial Killer Files of the World's Worst Murderers, told us that the misconception that serial killers are all geniuses may stem from the fact that the few serial killers who are highly intelligent, like Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy and Rodney Alcala, are more fascinating to the general public. They are therefore more studied and talked about than the fact that movies and TV rarely make a good storyline about dumb serial killers, while smart killers like Hannibal Lecter and Dexter Morgan from Showtime's Dexter makes for excellent entertainment, which of course is how these stereotypes are shaped, he said. The smarter serial killers probably could have done more with their life if they channeled their intelligence for good, but they were often unmotivated. Bundy reportedly had an IQ of 136, but repeatedly dropped out of colleges and worked multiple minimum wage jobs. He was described as having a lack of ambition. Then there's Dahmer, who reportedly had an even higher IQ of 144. He was so charismatic as a teen that he managed to get clearance for him and 2 classmates to visit the White House while on a high school field trip to Washington, D.C., according to the graphic novel My Friend Dahmer, written by Dahmer's former classmate Durf. Despite his intelligence and confidence, Dahmer didn't succeed professionally. He was discharged from the army due to a drinking problem. Later, he was fired from his night shift job at a chocolate factory. A lot of high people with high IQ in society seem to have a problem with motivation, Rosewood explained. Dahmer and Bundy might not have been successful in the eyes of society, but they were certainly above average in what motivated them killing. Authorities believe that Dahmer killed 17 men and boys and Bundy killed 36, although police believe he may have killed around 100 young women. But the American serial killer with the most confirmed kills and who evaded police for decades was someone with a reportedly IQ of just 82, which is considered on the low side. Gary Ridgway, known as the Green River Killer, was convicted of killing 49 people, yet he confessed to killing 71. He began killing in 1982, but wasn't caught by police until 2001, so while he certainly isn't the most intelligent man, he somehow has the most confirmed kills in the United States, Rosewood said. Randy Woodfield, the I-5 killer, had an IQ of about 100, according to Ann Rule's book, The I-5 Killer. That's about average. Like Ridgway though, the authorities believe he was a prolific killer. Though he was only convicted for 1 murder, he has been linked to 18, and police believe it is possible he killed a total of 44 throughout Washington state, Oregon, and California, within a time span of just 1 year, between 1980 and 1981. Dennis Rader, also known as the BTK, bind, torture, kill, killer, taunted the media for decades and got away with it. He killed 10 people between 1974 and 1991. But was he smart? He was eventually caught in 2005 after he actually asked the police in a letter if a floppy disk could be traced back to him or not. The police answered his question in a newspaper ad, saying that it could not. They lied. Soon enough, Rader followed their advice and sent a floppy disk to a local television station, which led to his capture. Not the most clever move. He was patient with his murders, which is probably why he got away with it for so long, Rosewood explained, adding that he didn't find Rader to be very smart. It's unclear what Rader's IQ is. At the end of the day, he got caught because he liked to taunt the media and the police. Peter Vronsky has PhD in criminal justice history and is the author of 3 books about serial killers. Serial Killers: The Method and Madness of Monsters, Female Serial Killers and Sons of Cain. A history of serial killers from the Stone Age to the present. He told us that America's deadliest serial killer to date, Ridgway, was long suspected of being the Green River Killer, who targeted sex workers. So, he wasn't exactly invisible, just hard to arrest. When you target street prostitutes, you're targeting victims that often have unstable families, Vronsky explained. Nobody knows when they were seen for the last time. Often they are working independently. So, it's very difficult to build a timetable of where maybe the victim and the suspect intersected. Ridgway was also questioned several times by investigators, but police lacked the evidence to catch him until 2001. When DNA linked him to the crimes. So perhaps it wasn't because of being clever that he evaded the police, but rather because of older forensic technology and profiling. Vronsky said back in the 1970s and 80s, police suffered from linkage blindness. The term serial killer was only coined in the 1980s. With Bundy, police could not imagine a single perpetrator committing so many murders in so many jurisdictions, Vronsky said. On top of that, jurisdictions didn't talk to each other either. Today is a different era. Now, we have technological databases, major advances in DNA technology and cell phone data, and most departments are familiar with what a serial killer does. We are starting to see arrests today where budding and wannabe serial killers are caught, Vronsky said. We are apprehending them after their first murder. They never get a chance to become a serial killer. It's a lot harder to get away with murder these days, and more difficult for serial killers to outsmart the system. That doesn't mean their urge to kill is going anywhere. What serial killers lack in superior intelligence, they make up for in predatory instincts. Vronsky told us that what serial killers have is a highly developed sense of animal cunning, which we commonly mistake for intelligence. They're hunters. They also have an instinct for manipulation and finding people's weaknesses. They can smell that out. Often we mistake those instincts, those destructive animalistic predatory instincts, for intelligence. So, the Hannibal Lecter and Dexter Morgan types are pretty much myths. You don't have the Hannibal Lecter kind of elegant super intelligent serial killers.
Number 3.
Shortly after his birth, Lawrence Bittaker was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. George Bittaker. George worked in aircraft factories, which required the family to move often. They went from Pennsylvania to Florida to Ohio, and finally to California. Bittaker, who had a tested IQ of 138, dropped out of high school in 1957. After several run-ins with juvenile authorities and police. Shortly thereafter he was picked up for car theft, leaving the scene of a hit-and-run accident and evading arrest. He was imprisoned in the California Youth Authority until he was 19. The FBI arrested Lawrence Bittaker in Louisiana several days after his release for violating the Interstate Motor Vehicle Theft Act. Convicted in August of 1959, Lawrence was sentenced to 18 months in an Oklahoma federal reformatory. His behavior there soon got him transferred to a Missouri medical center. He was released after serving 6 months of his sentence. In December 1960 he was arrested in Los Angeles, and in May 1961 was sentenced to 115 years in a state prison. A psychiatric evaluation determined Lawrence Bittaker to be paranoid and borderline psychotic, with little control over his impulses. Despite these findings, he was released in 1963. Lawrence was picked up 2 months later for parole violation and suspected robbery, and again in October 1964. While in prison he was again given a psychiatric evaluation, and again determined to be borderline psychotic. In July 1967 Lawrence Bittaker was arrested and convicted of theft and leaving a hit-and-run accident. He was sentenced to 5 years, but was released in April 1970. However, in March 1971, he was picked up for burglary and parole violation. He was sentenced to 6 months to 15 years in October. He served 3 years of that sentence. Bittaker was arrested again when he stabbed a supermarket employee in the parking lot of the business. Lawrence had stuffed a steak down his pants, and the employee had followed him outside and tried to stop him. The man survived, and Bittaker was convicted of attempted murder. He was given another psychiatric evaluation, which rejected the borderline psychotic finding, saying instead that he was a classic sociopath. Another psychiatrist called Bittaker a sophisticated psychopath. Despite the psychiatrist's warnings, he was released in November 1978 and moved to Los Angeles. At age 17, Roy Norris dropped out of school and joined the Navy. He spent most of his service stationed in San Diego and served 4 months in Vietnam. He saw no combat while there. Back in San Diego, Norris was arrested on November 1969 for attempted rape. 3 months later, out on bail before his trial, he was arrested again. He had tried to attack a woman in her home. Police arrived him before he could harm her. At this point, Roy Norris was discharged from the Navy for psychological problems. In May 1970, while still out on bail, he attacked a female student on the San Diego State University campus. He had jumped the woman from behind, hit her on the head with a rock, then slammed her head several times on the concrete. The woman survived, so Norris was only charged with assault with a deadly weapon. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital as a sex offender and spent 5 years there. When released, he was considered no further danger to others. 3 months after his release, Norris attacked and raped a 27-year-old woman, convicted of forcible rape. He was sent to the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. While there, Roy Norris met and befriended Lawrence Bittaker. Norris claims Bittaker saved his life twice in prison, which bound him to Bittaker, according to the prisoner's code. Norris was released on January 15, 1979, and moved in with his mother in Los Angeles. This is where it is believed he began an incestuous relationship. Bittaker contacted Norris, and they continued their prison friendship on the outside. Bittaker and Norris hatched a plan to rape and kill local girls. Bittaker bought a 1977 GMC cargo van, which they came to call Murder Mac, because it had no side windows in the back and a large passenger side sliding door. From February to June 1979, they gave their plan a test run. They drove along the Pacific Coast Highway, stopped at beaches, talked to girls, and took their pictures. When the pair was arrested, police found close to 500 pictures among Bittaker's possessions. On June 24, 1979, they claimed their first victim, 16-year-old Cindy Schaefer. They picked her up near Redondo Beach, Norris forcing her into the van. He duct-taped her mouth and bound her arms and legs. Lawrence Bittaker drove the van to a fire road on San Gabriel Mountains, out of sight of the highway. Both men raped the girl, and then Bittaker wrapped a straightened wire coat hanger around her neck. He tightened the wire with vice grip pliers, strangling her to death. They wrapped her body in a plastic shower curtain and dumped it in a nearby canyon. The pair picked up 18-year-old Andrea Hall hitchhiking on July 8 of the same year. Norris hid in the back of the van, and Bittaker talked her into the van. After she had gotten in, Bittaker offered her a drink from a cooler in the back. When she went to the cooler, Norris jumped her, bound her arms and legs, and taped her mouth shut. They took her to the fire road and raped her several times. Bittaker dragged her from the van, and Norris left to get beer. When he returned, Hall was gone, and Bittaker was looking at Polaroid pictures of her. He had stabbed her with an ice pick in both ears and strangled her. He threw her body over a cliff. On September 3rd, while driving near Hermosa Beach, the pair spotted 2 girls on a bus stop bench and offered them a ride. Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Lee Lamp, 13, accepted their offer. The girls became suspicious when Lawrence Bittaker parked the van near a suburban tennis court. Lamp went for the back door, and Norris hit her in the head with a bat. A short scuffle broke out, but with Bittaker's help, Norris subdued the teens and bound them both. Lawrence Bittaker then drove them all to the fire road. They kept the girls alive for 2 days, raping and torturing them the whole time with a wire hanger and pliers. They even made an audio recording of the events. Eventually, Bittaker stabbed Gilliam in both ears with an ice pick. When she didn't succumb to her injuries, both men took turns strangling her until she died. Bittaker then strangled Lamp, while Norris hit her in the head with a sledgehammer 7 times. They dumped the bodies over a cliff, the ice pick still in Gilliam's head. They then kidnapped Shirley Sanders on September 30th, making her and forcing her into the van. Both raped her, but she escaped. Police had showed her pictures of the men, and she had identified the men as Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris. The pair kidnapped 16-year-old Lynette Ledford on October 31st, raping her and torturing her while driving around Los Angeles, instead of heading to their usual mountain spot. Bittaker stabbed the young girl several times and tortured her with the pliers. During her torture, her screams and pleas were tape recorded as Bittaker repeatedly beat her elbows with a sledgehammer, all the time demanding that she not stop screaming. He eventually strangled her with a wire hanger, using the pliers to twist a cinching loop around her throat. Instead of tossing her body over a cliff, They left it on a random lawn in Hermosa Beach to see the local reaction in the newspaper. The body was found the next day and caused quite a stir, being only days since the arrest of Hillside Strangler Angelo Buono. Roy Norris had been telling prison friend Jimmy Dalton all about the murders. Dalton thought the stories were lies until Letford's body was found. He talked to his lawyer, and they went to the Los Angeles Police Department with information about Norris. At the trial, both Roy Norris and Lawrence the Pliers Bittaker were charged with murder, kidnapping, forcible rape, sexual perversion and criminal conspiracy. Bittaker was convicted of rape, torture, kidnapping, and murder on February 17, 1981, and sentenced to death. Lawrence Bittaker dies while awaiting execution at a California prison from natural causes at the age of 79 on December 19, 2019. Roy Norris, who pleaded guilty and turned state's evidence against his partner, was eligible for parole in 2009. He refused to go to his parole hearing and was thereby denied parole. He is eligible again in 2019. Roy Norris, one of the two toolbox killers who murdered and tortured 5 Southern California girls in 1979, died on February 24, 2020, while in prison.
Number 4.
David Weber wasn't disappointed when he heard that his brother's request for parole was denied. He didn't even grieve. He just sighed deeply and felt great relief. Relief because his brother Edmund Kemper, 72, is probably the most brutal serial killer in America's history. For over 40 years, Kemper's relatives have been living in fear that the notorious killer will go after them after his release from prison to finish what he started. Edmund Kemper's brother, who uses an alias to protect himself and try to have an everyday life, gave an interview to the media for the first time in several decades to the British Daily Mail. He has this control over the family, and there's still anger over what he did. So many people live in fear that he could be allowed freedom. You just can't trust what a president may decide. Few people know that this psychopath was the main inspiration for perhaps the best psycho thriller, Silence of the Lambs. A huge man, over 2 meters tall, 6'93", with a familiar face we see on the street every day, killed and dismembered at least 6 young women, but not before murdering his mother, grandmother, grandfather, and mother's best friend. All happened in the period from 1964 to 1973. His grandparents were his first victims, and he killed them when he was only 15. Edmund Kemper tore their bodies apart, and then had sex with them, even with his mother, who had a dominant attitude towards him. According to sources, the mother neglected him and indulged in alcohol. The fact that he further mutilated her body shows how complicated his relationship with his mother was. After he dismembered and sodomized her, he hung her against the wall and played darts, shooting at her. The story of Edmund Kemper was revived on Netflix. The show about serial killers, Mindhunter, included him as one of the main characters. The monster was sentenced to 8 life sentences. He is currently in the California Medical Facility prison. He has not been in solitary confinement for years, but shares space with other prisoners. Edmund Kemper was particularly interesting and frightening to inspectors, psychologists, and behavioral scientists, because he spoke about his atrocities with such calmness that had never been seen before. Edmund Kemper was only 9 years old when his father, Edmund the Elder, left the family. He heard nothing about him for several years, and then learned that he had married a German immigrant named Elfrieda. He then ran away from home and went to Santa Cruz, where his father lived with his new family. Edmund complained that his mother beat him, neglected him, and constantly drank, but Edmund the Elder did not want to be with his son. He sent him to his parents, grandparents whom Edmund Kemper hated. He called his grandfather a senile old man, and he could thank his mother for hating his grandmother, who didn't teach him much except to think the worst about his father's parents. He spent less than 2 weeks with them before killing them. They were his first victims. According to his biography, Edmund Kemper allowed his evil genes to flourish after killing his grandparents. He had an unusually high IQ. The American media mentioned that it was higher than 180, but at the same time, he was a paranoid schizophrenic. He spent 6 years in the psychiatric institution Atascadero. Allegedly, he cheated on IQ tests to score only 146 and tricked psychiatrists. At the same time, he became so close to the medical staff that he became an assistant to psychiatrists, conducted assessments of other prisoners, and formed their psychological profiles. Weber angrily said, "That's ridiculous." Well, he's just the opposite. The man cut off people's heads and raped them. It is clear to everyone that he deceived the doctors. That is why he was released from the insane asylum. He is an evil genius, a sociopath who can deceive anyone who doesn't know him. After less than 6 years in Atascadero, Edmund Kemper was released and sent to live with his mother. How great a mistake was made was seen only a few years later. In May 1972, Edmund Kemper charmed 2 Fresno University students who agreed to drive them. Hours later, Mary Ann Pesci and Anita Lucca were dead, raped, and dismembered. Edmund Kemper brought their remains home, photographed them naked, dissected them, and had sex with their skulls. 4 months later, he killed Rosalinda Thorpe, 23, and Allison Liu, 20, and had sex with their bodies, after which he impaired them. In early 1973, he killed 15-year-old Aiko Ku and Cindy Schell, 18. Edmund Kemper's bloody campaign ended with the murder of his mother and her best friend Sally Hallett in 1973. Based on the story of Edmund Kemper, in addition to Silence of the Lambs, American Psycho was filmed, where Christian Bale played the psychopath Patrick Bateman. One part of the dialogue was taken from a transcript of Edmund Kemper's conversation with the police, which was then translated into Bale's role. "When I see a beautiful girl walking down the street, I think of 2 things. One part of me wants to take her out to dinner, talk to her, be very nice and sweet, and treat her like a lady." When officers asked him what's the other thing he thought of, Edmund Kemper replied, "How her head would look like nailed to a stake." Edmund Kemper's lawyer Scott Curry said that his client has come to terms that he will never get out of prison. Curry said, "He is fully aware of that, so he turned to his life in prison. He is happy, he enjoys a new life." Edmund Kemper's brother said in an interview with the Daily Mail that no one knows the exact number of his victims. Everyone says that he killed 10 people. But at the same time, they know that is not true. Edmund kept more than half the truth to himself. We all know he killed more people, and he knows we know it, but he enjoys torturing us. He is the man who destroyed the whole family, closer and wider. Well, I know at least 4 or 5 of our relatives who said that they would catch him and kill him like a dog if he gets out of prison. He may be funny to someone in the series on Netflix, but he is just a beast. The killer's brother pointed out that Kemper is manipulating everyone, and that he never told the truth about his crimes. He is aware that he will never get out of prison, because both the authorities and the public, and he knows that he will not be able to restrain himself without continuing where he left off. I see that he is great in prison. He lives better than poor people on the loose. He has regular meals, a gym, swimming. We can thank the American liberals for all that. As for me, I hope he chokes on food. If he approached my family or me, I would kill him on the spot.
Number 5.
Andrew Phillip Cunanan, August 31, 1969 – July 23, 1997, was an American spree killer who murdered at least 5 people, including fashion designer Gianni Versace, during a 3-month period in 1997, ending with Cunanan's suicide at age 27. On June 12, 1997, Cunanan became the 449th fugitive to be listed by the FBI on the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. Cunanan was born in National City, California to Modesto Cunanan, a Filipino-American, and Mary Ann Schillaci, an Italian-American. He was the youngest of 4 children. Modesto Cunanan could not attend his son's birth, as he was serving in the U.S. Navy in the Vietnam War at the time. In 1981, his father enrolled him in the Bishop's School in the La Jolla neighborhood of San Diego, California. At school, Cunanan was remembered as being bright and very talkative, testing with an IQ of 147. As a teenager, he developed a reputation as a prolific liar, given to telling fantastic tales about his family and personal life. He was also adept at changing his appearance, according to what he felt was most attractive at a given moment. After graduating from high school in 1987, he enrolled at the University of California, San Diego, where he majored in American history. After graduating from UCSD, he settled in the Castro district of San Francisco. There, he frequented high-class gay bars and prostituted himself to wealthy older men. When Cunanan was 19, his father deserted his family to avoid arrest for embezzlement. That same year, his mother learned of Andrew's homosexuality. During the ensuing argument, he threw her against a wall, dislocating her shoulder. Before the murders, Cunanan was involved in petty theft and drug dealing. The first known murder was that of his friend Jeffrey Trail, a former U.S. naval officer and propane salesman, on April 25, 1997, in Minneapolis. The next victim was architect David Matson, who was found on the east shore of Rush Lake near Rush City, Minnesota, on April 29, 1997, with gunshot wounds to the head. Police recognized a connection, as Trail's body had been found in Matson's Minneapolis loft apartment. Cunanan next drove to Chicago and killed 72-year-old Lee Miglin, a prominent real estate developer, on May 4, 1997. Following this murder, the FBI added him to its 10 most wanted list. 5 days later, Cunanan, who took Miglin's car, found his fourth victim in Pennsville, New Jersey, at the Finns Point National Cemetery, killing 45-year-old caretaker William Reese. While the manhunt focused on Reese's truck, Cunanan hid in plain sight in Miami Beach, Florida, for 2 months between his fourth and fifth murders. He even used his own name to pawn a stolen item, knowing that police routinely check pawn shop records for stolen merchandise. On July 15, 1997, Cunanan murdered fashion designer Gianni Versace. A witness attempted to pursue him, but could not catch him. The vehicle he used, including the clothes he had just been wearing, an alternative passport, and newspaper clippings of his murders, was found in a nearby garage by the police, who responded. 8 days after murdering Versace, on July 23, 1997, Cunanan shot himself in the mouth in the upstairs bedroom aboard a Miami houseboat. He used the same gun he used to commit the other murders, a Taurus semi-automatic pistol in .40 S and W caliber, which had been stolen from the first victim, Jeff Trail. At the time of the crimes, there was much public and press speculation that Cunanan's motives were tied to a diagnosis of HIV infection. However, an autopsy found him to be HIV negative. Police searched the houseboat where Cunanan died in order to piece together a motive for his killing spree. However, Cunanan left behind few personal belongings, surprising investigators, given his reputation for acquiring money and expensive possessions from wealthy older men. Police considered few of the findings to be of note, except multiple tubes of hydrocortisone cream and a fairly extensive collection of the fiction of C.S. Lewis. His motivations remain a mystery. Various theories include jealousy for Versace's role as a gay icon, as well as necessity and opportunity in some of the other murders. Examination of his behavior from reports also indicate that he may have been a psychopath, a personality disorder characterized by an abnormal lack of empathy.